Wow, hey, pura vida, mi gente. ¿Cómo están? How you guys doing? Much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in once again. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Shout out to everybody who's in the live chat. Thank you for joining. Today we're gonna just talk about another early man in America. Early man, another Pleistocene man in America. This time specifically in Florida. Many people have talked about this, I'm not the first one. Just wanted to do my own little thing on it in case you didn't know about Vero Man. Vero Man. Body bag for the illusion. Shout out to Drop. Hey, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Wow. Wow. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about an archaeological site near Vero Beach, Florida. As you guys can see here, where it's located. Wow. Old Vero excavation site. And now permanently closed, huh? In modern times, huh? Oh, you can't be digging in there. You're gonna rewrite history. No more of that. All right, so you guys see where it is? The old Vero excavation site. Aloha, yeah. Namaste, pura vida. ¿Qué me dice mi gente? Thanks for tuning in. We got the people rolling in. Yeah. We got the people rolling in. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate you guys tuning in to the live feed. Wow, pura vida, mi gente. Pura vida, mi gente. Oh, wow. Yeah, welcome. We in the matrix. We charging up, yeah. Wow, pura vida. Wow. Yeah. Is the video removed from YouTube? What video? It's right here. We're live. So Vero Man, right? Just real quick, right? We're just gonna read real quick from Wikipedia just to see what it says real quick, like very basic, right? But then we're gonna get into some scholarly articles, right? And we're gonna get into a presentation. It's a video presentation. We're gonna basically review, critique, and use for education purposes, fair use, so we can learn as a community here on the fair use laws. So it says here, Vero Man refers to a set of fossilized human bones found near Vero, now Vero Beach, Florida, in 1915 and 1916. The human bones were found in association with those of Pleistocene animals. With what? With Pleistocene animals, the human bones, right? We're not talking about apes. We're not talking about Neanderthal. We're not talking about any different type of human. We're talking about modern type humans with Pleistocene animals. The Pleistocene dates range from what? From 2,500,000 to 11,000 years ago. So which one? So where in all this time period era do these human bones supposedly appear, right? They can't prove what time. They'll tell us the latest, right? Minimum 11,000, 15,000. That's as far as they want to go. And people want to debate that, and the gatekeepers that they put in history, the same ones we already know, want to give it a lesser date, even though, as you guys were going to read today, it's official. Like the scientists at the time already said, "Now this is Pleistocene. It's found in the same strata in the same dirt as the animals, everything else that's there above and below it and to the sides. The animal fossils, these are fossils, right? Says the suggestion that humans might have been present in Florida or anywhere in the Americas during the Pleistocene was controversial at the time, huh? It still is. But you see what I'm saying? At that time, it was big time hijack to even think that. Now we know better. Now they're kind of admitting, giving dates. They know they're finding things, 30,000 years old, 50,000 years old, so they got to readjust, the time frames that they had given us, but they still haven't updated textbooks. That's a work in progress. That's literally a work in progress. They haven't really made that official. But controversial, right? Because the hijack was that, oh no, they came from the Bering Strait at a certain time. There was no humans here before that, right? And they can't even link up, these bones they found here to any migration coming from the Bering Strait. There's no proof, and they can't say, oh yeah, we found them. No, they have no, that would be all conjecture, you know. They found that there. This is very old. I'm talking about very old, very old humans. Okay, when we're talking about Pleistocene, right? Pleistocene, right? Referred to colloquially as the Ice Age, is the geological epoch that lasted from 2.5 to 11,000 years ago, right? So there's different Pleistocene eras. So there's the mid Pleistocene, and then there's the late. That would be the closest one, right? So when you go into late Pleistocene, right? Let's just say, just for fun, let's give it to them. Okay, let's say they're the bones are from the late Pleistocene, which is the most recent, right? It is intended to be the fourth division of the Pleistocene epoch within the ongoing Quaternary period. It is currently defined as the time between 129,000 and 11,000 years ago. Okay, that's the late Pleistocene. So when they're saying they found a man, right? When we're talking about going into the annual report of the Florida State Geological Survey, from the Florida Geological Survey, this is from publication date 1914 to 1915, right? This is how old we're going to read this right now. Okay, this is what we're about to read. When they're saying human remains and associated fossils from the Pleistocene of Florida, right? From the Pleistocene. So when we got late Pleistocene, again, between 129,000 and 11,000 years ago. All right, so they'll go ahead and play with the numbers and say, yeah, okay, 11,000, we'll give you that. That's the minimum they would, and that's as much as they want to really give it. They're gonna go right to the edge, right? But it's funny because if I say, hey, I was, or he passed away in the 80s, or he was born in the 80s, well, what year? You're gonna automatically pick 89 and December, like almost 1 month away from 1990 on purpose, just because you don't want to believe that there was other humans, maybe 50,000, 60,000, 80,000, 40,000 in Florida, right? In Florida, chilling with this. Watch. With horses, lions, camels, all in Florida, right? In many parts of America, they had all these animals. But in Florida, yes, they found a lot, just like in other parts. Humans living with elephants, horses, lions, tapirs, all that, jaguars, pantera, onca, all that in Florida, right? All that in Florida. Big giant sloths, all types of different elephants, not just the woolly haired. They make us think the elephants were only woolly haired. No, they had regular looking elephants here. We had the biggest lions, the original cheetahs. Okay, so that's kind of what we're gonna get into. I just want to also remind you that we got, a whole series dedicated to this kind of studies. If you don't know, it's if you go to my playlist tab on my main page, you will see a playlist called Forbidden Archaeology, Proof of Early Man in America or in Ancient America, where you'll see it, Forbidden Archaeology. And as you guys can see, we've gone over the Guadalupe woman, we've gone over the Pleistocene man. Pleistocene, that's even older. And that's the Calavera skull in California. Also the Nampa little figurine they have found. We're talking about William Nevin's lost discovery, 50,000-year-old civilization in Mexico, the basis for the story of Lemuria. Then we got Calico, the Calico early man site, 200,000-year-old tools. This is what I'm talking about. We've got the research. It's not one isolated find. Then we got early man in America, out of place bones, geological archaeology. That was a good one too, guys. We go over a lot, actually, different findings. And then we got the Huejotlaco archaeological site in Mexico, 250,000-year-old settlement, proved by USGS dating test. All right, that's a great video. And what was very significant about this one and what we're going to read about today is they found one of the bones had a drawing or an inscription of an elephant here in Huejotlaco archaeological site. And we're going to see today that they also found the exact same thing in Florida, literally. Like, I don't know if this was a thing, why they were doing it, but they were doing it. Talking about possibly the oldest art in so-called America, right? Or even in the world, you never know. Because again, the Pleistocene is from 129,000 to 11,000 years ago, anywhere in between there. All right. So we got that playlist. It keeps going. We got a lot of good stuff on this playlist. Check it out. All right, a lot of good stuff. We got the origin of animals in America. Like this is what I was saying earlier about we had horses originated here, dogs, all that, carnivores, all that. Mammals, right? And then we got another playlist, Untold Ancient American Truth, how it connects to the old world, knowing all that, how it connects to the old world, man. We got so many videos in here, okay? We got so many videos here to help you out. We got a little playlist if you like this type of specific topic. You can go ahead and cache that. But again, Forbidding Archaeology is what relates to like what today. This is actually part of this playlist now, this video from today. All right. So we're going to go ahead real quick before we get to the video presentation, just read a little bit from this article. Let me just... Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys doing that. And it says here again, human remains and associated fossils from the Pleistocene of Florida. The feature, says a new and very important locality. This is by E.H. Sellers. This is from way back in that time, right? All right. So it says a new and very important locality for invertebrate and plant fossils was found in 1913 at Vero on the Atlantic coast in central eastern Florida. The feature of a special interest at this locality is the presence of fossil human remains in association with the Pleistocene vertebrates, all right? Again, we're just talking about the annual report of the Florida State Geological Survey, scholarly journal here, what we're reading. We're talking about human remains in Pleistocene with other fossils, Human remains have been found at this locality in two separate strata, which differ in age, the one being superimposed upon the other. The contemporaneity of man and the Pleistocene fossils is based not upon a single discovery, but upon successive discoveries, including bones from 2 human skeletons, and in addition, flints and implements made by man. All right, made by man. The geologic conditions at this locality fortunately are favorable for a correct placing of the fossils, as the older human remains are here found in a freshwater stratum, which rests upon marine shell marl and is overlaid by laminated fluviatile deposit. Although lying in near the surface, the possibility of the human bones representing a recent burial is excluded by the fact that the overlying laminated stratum is undisturbed, okay? It's not no recent hoax or fraud that somebody just, oh, deposited these bones here. The geologists can tell the difference, guys. The stratum it was found in, it tells them the age according to their sciences, right? According to how they date everything on Earth. They have to do the same here. And it's telling them Pleistocene. So it has been undisturbed. The condition of preservation as well as the abundance of the associated Pleistocene fossils is such as to show that they could not have washed into this deposit from an older formation. There is thus conclusive evidence that the human remains and the associated fossils are contemporaneous. All right? All the other animals, meaning when he's saying the associated fossils, right? The associated fossils, they all living at the same time together. They're all contemporaneous. These associated fossils, including mammals, birds, batrachians, reptiles, and fishes, afford incontestable evidence of the Pleistocene age of the deposits. Okay? Of the mammalian species of this fauna, a few, including chiefly small and conspicuous animals, have persisted to the present time, while the larger animals, including the elephants in Florida, elephants, mastodons, camels in Florida, camels originated in North America. Did you guys know that? We got a whole video on that. Camels and horses originated here. Bison, tapirs, Slavs have suffered extinction. All these animals are being found with the humans, with the exception of bison, which are native to North America, horses which have been reintroduced from Europe, and canids. So thus the hijack reintroduced. We had horses here when the Europeans arrived still. We got a whole video on that. And then the canids, it's saying dogs originated in the Americas. This is all stuff you can verify. That's what they don't teach you in schools and stuff. Because then that would have you thinking different. So it says the extinct relatives of these extinct species are now found in Central and South America. I'm talking about the canids. Let me go back so you guys can see. So horses have been introduced from Europe, and canids, which are worldwide in distribution. The existing relatives of these animals, we're talking about the shallot, in Asia or in Africa. A preliminary paper by the writer relating to human remains from the Pleistocene of Florida, published in the American Journal of Science, July 1916, contains the records of excavations at Vero to the close of May 1916. A second paper published in Science contains notice of discoveries made in June 1916. The present publication includes results obtained at this locality to the close of September 1916. The occurrence of fossils at Vero first became known as a result of the construction of a drainage canal made by the Indian River Farms Company. Throughout the greater part of its course, this canal, which extends from the coast several miles inland, cuts through the surface materials, including sand, marl, and muck beds, and into marine shell marl. In the marine marl, invertebrates are found in abundance and in excellent state of preservation, while in the sands, freshwater marls, and muck beds, vertebrates and freshwater invertebrates are not infrequently preserved. The chief locality for vertebrate and plant fossil, however, is at the public road crossing 1/2 mile north of Vero, where the canal cuts into an old stream bed. The canal enters the stream bed about 500 feet west of the crossing and follows it while passing under the bridge and for 500 and 600 feet beyond, or for a total distance of about 1,000 feet. All right. So that's if you kind of know exactly, you know, where this is taking place, right, in Florida. If you're from there, you know what they're talking about. But then it starts talking about, you know, who's involved in the excavation. As you guys can see here, who found it, who have contributed to the studies, you know. We're gonna move forward. So look, the U.S. National Museum, the American Museum of Natural History, and the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences facilities, all these credited organizations and people. Okay. Just a little bit on the geological section at Vero. I guess how it looked. It says it is desirable before describing the human remains to consider the general geologic section at Vero, as well as the late geologic history of this part of the Atlantic coast. The marine shell marl into which the canal cuts, number 1 of the section shown in text figure 2, is part of the extensive series of marine marls which border the Atlantic coast, beginning on the north near St. Augustine, where the marl is known as Coquina Rock, and extended south to the Everglades of Florida, beyond which the shell marls give place to the shallow water limestones of extreme southern Florida. All right, so that's kind of like the description. They're saying this place was also like grassland, savanna, like back in those times. All right, so that's just the report. I just wanted to show you guys that this is like real. Like there's a lot of websites that have been taken down, you know, with information on this. Okay, so I'll go ahead and put this article and link in the chat right now, in the live chat, so you guys can read it if you like. Get the whole drop, all the evidence, all the evidence what they're finding here. Okay. It says here also the Journal of Archaeological Science, volume 38, issue 11. It says earliest art in the Americas, incised image of a proboscidean. This is the ancestors of all elephants. So the ancestor of all elephants was found throughout the Americas, right? That's what they're called, proboscidean. All right. How do I know that? Well, I did a video on that. I remember that. All right, so let's go to the proboscidean. So yeah, 3 living species of elephants are currently recognized as African birds. So these are the ancestors, okay, of all elephants that we know today, modern elephants. So they found these bones all over the Americas, right? So again, let me just hold up, search this. Okay. So they found an incised image of a proboscidean on a mineralized extinct animal bone from Vero Beach, Florida. So inside this archaeological site, in one of these mastodon bones, they found an inscription, a drawing inscribed on the bone of an proboscidean. You know how old those animals are? A proboscidean, just like in the site in Mexico, Huejatlaco, who's 250,000 years old, proboscidean inscribed in it. Guys, it's the exact same thing. Go watch the video so you can see what I'm talking about if you haven't watched it. All right, so what if this is also around that time frame, you know, that whatever they're saying over there, right? The oldest art. So this article obviously is not accessible unless you're part of this or you have a university access. And we got this little article here. It says the Vero Melbourne discoveries. Just real quick. Again, hold up. Appreciate your patience with life, you know. Thanks for tuning in. The Vero and Melbourne discovery, scientific controversy. Controversy. in the early 20th century. Jeffrey M. Mitchum, Arkansas's Archaeological Survey, right? At the beginning of the 20th century, the Florida archaeology was unorganized, with scholars and collectors digging or carrying out research in relative isolation. There was no state archaeologist or state agency charged with overseeing or managing archaeological sites in Florida. Ironically, it was a geologist who started paying official attention to the state's archaeological resource, albeit grudgingly. The Florida State Geological Survey was established in 1907, and Yale University educated Elias H. Sellers. So that's the guy who wrote that article, you know, that they're talking about, that we just were coming from, this one right here. Okay. Was hired as the first state geologist. His primary mission was to supersede survey of geology at the state, but the reality was that he and his assistants were also documenting other natural resources, including animals, plants, and artifacts. Sellers' correspondence files at the Florida Geological Survey revealed that he was getting letters and visits from citizens asking questions about archaeological sites or wanted to have artifacts identified. Then, as now, many people had no idea of the distinction between archaeologists and geologists. Out of the necessity, Sellers learned a little about Florida archaeology, mainly from reading the published works of Terence B. Moore and few other articles on the subject available at the time. In November 1913, he received a letter from Mr. Isaac M. Wills of Vero Beach. Mr. Wills and some friends, most notably Frank Ayers, had collected fossils along the banks of a canal being dug near Vero. Wills mailed some of the material to Sellers, who realized that they were well-preserved Pleistocene fossils. They were of great interest to Sellers, and he encouraged Wills to keep monitoring the canal construction. Wills and Ayers continued to collect fossils at the canal, and in October of 1915, Frank Ayers came upon bones in place that appeared to be human. He and Mr. Wills then removed around 26 whole or fragmentary mineralized human bones, all apparently from a single individual. Sellers was particularly interested in the find because bones of extinct elephants, horses, ground sloths, and other Pleistocene mammals were found at the same depth or higher on both sides of the locality where the human remains have been found. Meaning, yeah, he's from that time period. So if there's even animals like that higher than the human bones, meaning those animals might be from a more recent age than the human. If he's a little lower, you know, depending on how they, you know, how they calculate the strata, you know, that according to their science, right? The discovery of these remains and their apparent antiquity spurred Sellers to travel to Vero and conduct excavations, which he began in 1916. Almost immediately, he uncovered a mammoth tusk with presumed engravings and a bird bone with possible intentional markings. These were in the same stratum that had produced the human remains. Then in June of 1916, human remains were found in a different area, but again in the same stratum. So again, it wasn't just one skeleton, one human bone they find, and they find a lot of different humans in the same strata, guys, in this Pleistocene era with all these so-called extinct Ice Age animals. And they're not supposed to be finding humans according to the history they taught us in school, especially when I was young, in elementary and middle school and high school. You know, I'm still young, but I'm saying when I was in school, they didn't teach us this stuff. They didn't say, hey, you know, well, there was humans where, you know, running around with elephants in Florida. But by the way, so, and June of 1960, human remains were found in different area, but again in the same stratum. Ultimately, human bones from at least 5 individuals were recovered from the site. In the general vicinity of the human bones, a number of artifacts were also recovered. Artifacts, 6 shirt flakes were collected, but one case, these are probably onward debitage. Sellers also recovered a number of bone tool fragments, including pins and a fish hook. A projectile point fragment was found in the same stratum as some of the human remains. This point appears to be an archaic steam point with the stem broken off. A number of pottery sherds also came from the stratum. Pleistocene pottery in America. Come on now. They can't even tell you how old though. They're gonna give you the minimum. the most closest to our age, they're going to try to say, well, it has to be that, you know, because it can't be older than that. Yeah, but America's a true old world, but I'm trying to tell you. So a lot of pottery there, both plain and St. John's Creek stamped. Wow. Pottery shirts with both plain and St. John's Creek stamped. Settlers began contacting colleagues and scientists in other disciplines, getting help and second opinions with identifying some of the fossil human remains and artifacts. He published a preliminary paper in the July 1916 issue of the American Journal of Science, followed by a short one in the journal Science. His contention was expressed by the last line in the comprehensive report and the English annual report of the Florida Geological Survey 1916. By these discoveries in Florida, the contemporaneity of man with Pleistocene fauna is definitely established for the first time in America. All right. The news was greeted with typical skepticism from colleagues, which Sellers expected. He invited scientists of various disciplines from the Smithsonian Institution. Uh-oh. You know what happens when they come around? They're the gatekeepers. The U.S. Geological Survey, also all these people be gatekeeping, and other institutions to visit the site and carry out their own inspections and investigations. Several people accepted his invitation, and in October of 1916, he hosted Alex Hidrikla. So this guy, I have to do a video, I guess. I had mentioned it before in videos. He's a big hijack, guys. This guy is a gatekeeper. He's all about the whole Bering Strait. He's the guy who made the Bering Strait theory popular. He's the one that tries to say there was no humans prior to, like, you know, 9,000, 8,000, you know, 10, you know, all that in America. He's the hijack of hijacks in his time. So this guy was one of the biggest oppositions to this finding. Of course, he's supposed to, Mr. Andres Hadrikla. Yeah. So of the U.S. National Museum, right? And Wayland Vaughn, U.S. Circle, and all these guys from the Carnegie Institute of Washington, they all went there to do their own thing. But it was already official by geologists and archaeologists. You get it? All right. So just want to read a little bit of background of this, you know, so you guys can understand. We're talking about very old human bones. We're talking about an old Vero excavation site in Vero Beach, Florida. Vero Beach, Florida, right? Uh-oh, the true old world, right? All right, we're gonna go ahead and get a presentation real quick.
I'm not entirely.
Whoa! Hold up! Hold up, guys. So shout out. This is for fair use. All right. This is one of the main geologists or archaeologists in charge of the site in modern times, right? So we're gonna go ahead and get it from him and see a little presentation he did. Okay.
I'm not entirely sure how many of you are familiar with the raging controversy that the creation of the town of Vero engendered. So I'll briefly touch on that throughout my talk, and I'll come back to it. I'll try not to assume you guys know too much about it, but basically, without the town, there is no site. And the formation of the town required the draining of a great landmass out to the west and north and south of, in basically every direction around the what we know now as the Vero site. I promise I only have a couple of text slides, and we'll move past them fairly quickly. But in grand terms, with the broadest paintbrush, some of the things that archaeologically we're interested in include the geologic history of the site, how it evolved from essentially a fairly xeric or savanna-like grassland at some point farther back in the Pleistocene to essentially a big bog that eventually, as the water table continues to rise. And the Harbor Branch research here would have been basically a desert institute for a while in the Pleistocene. It would have been, you know, sea levels basically pushed the ocean. The sea level is so reduced, approaching 400 feet, that the continental shelf has exposed land about 30 to 35 miles east of here. creating very little surface water. Certainly the Floridian aquifer is pretty much out of reach. And so the very specific things that cause the canal to be dug in the first place are in fact important throughout the end of the Pleistocene. That we essentially have a bit of an oasis going on. And so the geologic history, the animals, the plants, and the human beings on that landscape are of great importance to us and are, of course, the things that are greatly interesting to us. I realize a lot of the things I want to say, or the way I would say them, very much dovetail with things Greg said in terms of we find things out in the field, the museum, and the lab work. Basically, it's the conjunction of all three lines of attack that hopefully get us to the point of finding out individual genome history, genetic history of individual species of the humans, and the wealth of plants and animals that have also, and insects, and I'll get into more of that shortly, but I can't overstate the importance of the bog. When we have the wet oasis, essentially, and I hate to use the word again right away, but the conjunction of these streams right in one small place in the middle of a fairly dry landscape otherwise draws, it allows for an incredible amount of biotic diversity that otherwise is not very concentrated on that landscape. People show up in the area very early on. We know there's folks on this landscape at least by 13,000 years ago. But again, harking back to the bog, it's a difficult place to make a living. There's some artistic license taken here with what it's like to live in a bog, but only a little bit. So there was a bog. Some people tried to live in it, and a lot of time passed, and we came and tried to dig it up. That's the nuts and bolts of the speech in 3 slides there. This is just a quick view, and I'll come back to this, but it shows our weather port installed in the bottom of our bathtub that we have some pumps to drain, and I'll come back to exactly why all this is important and such. But the one issue that to just keep in mind is that this is a very unnatural landscape, both just what you're seeing on the surface, of course, but the actual elevation, the course of all the streams and waterways and such have all been tremendously impacted in the last 100 years, let alone what had happened naturally prior to that for thousands upon thousands of years. Again, just a couple of quick views of very slow water, anastomosing streams, meandering streams through very organically rich sediments in watery oases, I guess, is probably the nice way to say that. The picture in the bottom left really shows you the continental shelf around the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see it's a little harder here across this part of Florida. Again, the continental shelf at the glacial maximum about 22 to 26,000 years ago, depending on whose paper came out first and said, you don't know what you're talking about last. So as the debate rages, we're into the early 20,000 years ago, a little bit before what we think we're talking about in terms of the human occupation of the area, but not as far-fetched as you would hope or you might think. Roughly 95% of that landscape was exposed and available to humans by 13,000 years ago, when we have people all over the continental United States, all the way down to Venezuela, in fact.
So you see, he's like, he's trying to say, hey, maybe 20,000. They don't really know what time frame and Pleistocene that these people were living in. They could only guess. 20,000 is like pushing it for them, with the other archaeologists that don't want to accept this, right? So as you guys saw, there was more land as well. The shores used to extend more. So that was the Vero Beach is today was actually more inland than it is today. So that's what he was kind of describing.
So Greg primarily spoke about humans and alluded to the fact that there is a lot of other things on that landscape concentrated right here in Vero. This is one of 170 plus plants, animals, insects that have been recovered so far at the Vero site, which is an incredible, embarrassing abundance of riches. In that 170 plus animals, and plants, there are about 40 species that have gone extinct, including one of the most common fossil species at the site, a glyptodont. This is a distant relative of armadillos, and basically looks like a armored bump about two-thirds the size of a Volkswagen Bug. And again, it's one of those things that we have in quite a number of. I picked this little fellow first because it's very common at the site, but also because it's one of those strange things that doesn't show up at a whole lot of sites. I only feature two of the animals, but we have the mammoth, the mastodon, saber cats, a couple of extant cats like the bobcat or lynx, and the jaguar of all things. We have a very tropical suite of plants and animals as well. And I'll get into a little bit of how we don't have a very meaningful modern analog in terms of that genetic, or borrowing his term, biotic diversity, and of course the genetic diversity that's represented. I've personally built a database of about 3,000 Clovis sites, and I'll come into what that really means in a moment, but it's just a diagnostic kind of point from a site that we know is about 13,000 years old. The genetic study from Nature about 2 weeks ago that Greg showed a picture of, those artifacts, those were Clovis artifacts from Montana. They're very widespread and sort of the benchmark of, are you older than Clovis or pre-Clovis, or are the things that you found later than that in other Paleo-Indian or other younger cultures.
So again, he's being very careful. He's saying 15 to 20,000 year old site, and that, again, that's pushing it to a lot of these so-called scholars and archaeologists of today. They want to say it's 5,000, the most 6,000 years. They don't want to say it's that old. The other thing is he's still going with the whole Clovis thing, pre-Clovis, all this Clovis. That's a lot of hijack there. Shout out to Graham Hancock who kind of debunked all that Clovis stuff, and it's already officially, that's an old presentation video. I don't know how old. I think it's more than 10 years ago, but Clovis thing, that has been, that's out the drain now.
Well, our friend the Glyptodont shows up, is merely present in maybe 4 sites in North America, and we have a lot of it. Usually it's, if you find one of these little scoots, they have a nice dermal armor. Each individual scoot is readily identifiable to that species. Usually, if you find a handful of those, you're very excited because you have Glyptodont at your site, and that's all there is to work on. Well, we have some specimens for Greg and the team to go to work on. Here's an illustration of a couple of the Clovis points and early Paleo-Indian tools that have been found in the area. The one on the left is a very well-made Clovis point that was found just west of 58th Street. It's literally 5 miles from the Vero site. The one in the bottom is from Douglas Beach right here in St. Lucie County. And then there's another site that has similar, not quite the same, we call them Swanee points. They're a little bit younger than these, we believe, roughly 12. We're looking at 13,000-year-old artifacts here. We have what we believe to be 12,000-year-old artifacts about 20 miles away. So literally in every direction, circling the site. And again, I chose the word oasis intentionally because even though we know people are moving around the landscape, they're leaving some artifacts behind, and we know that they're making a living on that landscape, we really feel we have the place to have lived. And I'll show some pictures of some of that and come back to that in a little bit. This is a view that was published by Dr. Sellards here in 1916. Looking north, you're actually looking at where the airport is now, essentially, sort of to the west of the runways towards the tower and such. There was one broken point found with some of the human remains. The point disappeared sometime after about 1947. I have letters from Sellards back and forth with the young man who was his assistant in the teens, who ended up running the Florida Geologic Survey until the 50s. And after Sellards left Florida, he went to Texas and excavated he excavated at Clovis, the type site. He excavated at a number of other early Paleo-Indian sites, and really later in his career developed an understanding of the typology of stone tools, and really would have known what a fluted or Clovis point looked like at that time. And that's when he decided he really wanted to see the one from Vero again. And despite the controversy, and I'll come into that a little bit more in a moment, he never gave up on the site. He continued to try and answer the questions that remain unresolved to this day that we're actively working on now. Dangerous to the cause of science is sort of a banner or a slogan that we wear with a little bit of pride. When the first human remains started coming out of the walls of the canal in 1915, They'd been finding extinct animal bones for a couple of years, then finding human remains embedded in those same two layers in particular. It engendered a great deal of controversy, specifically because there was no accepted human presence in the Pleistocene or at the end of the Ice Age in the Americas at that time. There was a number of near-miss sites. There was a number of bad-miss sites. Vero was really the first great interdisciplinary team that really tried to attack every issue that every class of data, everything they could think of to analyze and work on, they really tried to do, whether it was botany, the invertebrate paleontology, the vertebrate paleontology, the human remains, the geology, all of it. And in that respect, I mentioned that specifically also to bring up the point that we are really actively engaged in a truly interdisciplinary team, where that's really how these things should work. They don't always work that way, and of course the comment at the top comes from one of the vocal critics. There's really two at the Smithsonian at the time. William Holmes, who'd been head of the archaeology and anthropology section for a number of years, was nearing the end of his career and the end of his life. And in 1925, he was writing an article about the similar situation at the Melbourne site. Very early or very late Pleistocene animals in association or a seeming association with more human remains and some artifacts. Not as much stuff, and I think we have, well, anyway. It was not as strong a case as was made at Vero. But in his last word on anything about early man, he takes a shot, and specifically the whole article is about Melbourne. Melbourne's bad because of this, that, and the other thing. And in the final paragraph, he takes a shot at Sellards and the Vero site and basically talks about the inadequacy of the data and that what Sellards is doing down in Vero is dangerous to the cause of science. So I think we'll put it on the back of our t-shirts.
All right, so, I just want to point out, he said during that time, which we mentioned earlier, it was controversial to say anything was that old, especially all the way into the East Coast, because the Bering Strait migration, supposedly, right, that theory came in the West, and they shouldn't have been in Florida, and the time framing, what they had given people at that period, it didn't match the history, what they were finding there in the geology. All right, so it was very controversial. So if people in the 1900s, early 1900s could have been wrong, and now it's established, in modern times that people had been here longer than that, what's to say that even 50 years from now, they're not gonna also accept that maybe people were here. We're gonna throw numbers out there. I know a lot of people don't like when I do this, but so 30, 40, 50,000, which has already been found 100,000 years old, right? Talking about true old world, oldest land out of the primordial waters, So just think about that. Like, if they were wrong back then, why couldn't they be wrong now? And this is what we were talking about, that Clovis thing. That has been debunked. This guy's still going with it. He's just, he won't get funding if he goes too crazy with it. You understand? He wouldn't get the funding. This will get shut down. He wouldn't be taken so seriously by universities because, it's got to fit it's got to fit their curriculum a little bit. They can't go too much outside of that. So, but he's doing his best, They hired him. He's doing his best, He's still letting you know, hey, 15 to 20,000, man. Come on, man. Come on, 15 to 20,000. Come on. Let me say it's that old. But this again could be, we already see the late Pleistocene. This again from 129,000 years ago to 11,000 years ago. So, hey, it could be any time between then.
Greg definitely needs a shirt that says dangerous to the cause of science. Well, so the lack of the idea or the acceptance of the idea of even a human presence in the New World at that time goes hand in hand with the very nascent development of Americanist archaeology as well. The very idea of stratigraphic excavation and arbitrary levels within given strata, because even though a layer may be this thick, there may be change over time within that layer. Those very notions are only coming together at the very time this is being done, in part by a man named Nels Nelson, who is working in New Mexico at a number of sites. He doesn't have enough data from the site. He doesn't find enough artifacts to really make his case until 1916, and he publishes that in December. And in May, he spends 2 days digging right there. The very formation of archaeology as we know it in the Americas, and certainly the aspects related to what developed out of early man research and become what we call Paleo-Indian or Old Indians archaeology, Vero is very much in the forefront of all of those things. And the work that we're doing right now is not doing any harm in bringing it right back to that level of prominence. One quick thing I wanted to mention from this. Carter and Associates show up in January of 1912, start plotting out all the canals. The main relief canal comes through here, where it is now, specifically because of the same reasons that all these creeks drained out, is they all come together and go out a gap in the northern end of the Atlantic coastal ridge. But essentially we have a low-lying, shallow basin that you can see the western margin of it, more or less, where the topographic lines are bunching up here. We are actually sitting right here and excavating adjacent to these little tiny wiggles in the stream on the slightly higher ground. The first human remains were found in this stretch, and it turned out Vero Man, as announced the first time around, was in fact Vero Woman. And then next time around, skeleton 2 and skeleton 3 turned out to be one individual that was a little bit more spread out, but also much more complete, and that was one larger man. So Vero Man is our nearest neighbor. There were also human remains, individual teeth and a toe bone found on the north side of the canal, 3 different items that represent 3 different individuals based on age and size of the pieces. So we have at least 5 individuals represented in the collections from a century ago. We're keeping our fingers crossed that we'll be able to use those genetically. Greg and the team are more optimistic about being able to extract genetic information from them. They are kind of a wash for us as archaeologists for radiocarbon dating to directly date the individual bones and get a feel for when these people were alive, largely because as the very discipline of archaeology is developing into what we reckon, field archaeology is developing as we know it, preservation techniques are not ideal is the politest way to say this. Many of the bones were painted with varnish. The botanical remains were soaked in paraffin and thereby rendered unsuitable for radiocarbon dating. And in part, that's one of the very reasons we're right back here working on the same site. But in terms of human occupation of the site, not necessarily what turns out to be the best preserved part of the site with good proximity to where Sellards worked previously, and the fact that as they moved west, they found more and more bones and artifacts and human remains as well. Those are all good reasons to be in this area, but that's not the reason. The reason to work this area is that it's the upstream side on a slightly elevated platform, looking out with an incredible view shed over where there's actually a stream missing. There was a third stream that came in up here. I've started joking at the site while talking to folks that essentially we're sitting at an intersection of all these streams where you have Home Depot on one corner and Walmart on the other, and other than nappable stone for making tools and points, you really have everything you want right here. And of course, that's why people use the site for thousands and thousands of years, sporadically, but time and time again. So a year after the canals were plotted, they started digging and installed a spillway. This is a postcard I actually found off eBay after it turned up in a book here. I went hunting for one. The important thing here, besides taking the shot that the crew keeps asking if that's me, is to look at where ground level is on both sides. You can see the spoil pile. I suspect that's spoil as well. They measured everything from 2 different locations, the front of the spillway and the railroad bridge as it stood in 1916 and 17. And so thankfully, it's more than a mere historical curiosity. This postcard actually helps us see that this piece of cement is broken away. It's no longer there, but the steps and everything else, the spillway is intact. It has not moved. So if we have meaningful measurements from it, which we do, they are actually still usable, and we can help articulate what happened 100 years ago with what we're trying to do today. This is a view back from the railroad bridge in 1917. You can see the spillway here, and you get a feel for, it's from a glass lantern slide that is unfortunately missing in the Florida Geologic Survey's collections. I've asked again, knowing I was coming here trying to get a better view, but it was also a copy that Chamberlain from the University of Chicago took, and it turns out his photographs all survive. So we will get good photographs. These images with whatever data we're able to glean from them will be available to us at some point. Again, Vero Woman came from in here, and we are working just back here, and I think you can actually see where Sellards is working here. We're just past him by 20 to 50 feet, depending on where in our excavations you are. This is what his excavation on the south bank looks like. The mountains of spoil back behind him are there. We actually think we can get measurements of exactly where that is, so we may be able to tie in some of these photos that aren't obviously at a point where he's writing down where they dug here, but we should be able to reconstruct some additional aspects of the work that went on so long ago. So let me talk briefly for what do we know about the geologic setting and the items that have been recovered from those layers. We have the Anastasia Formation is essentially the basement formation for much of the site, certainly all of the site that Sellards saw, that within the basin margin, within that sort of shallow pan that is filled with these sediments, we had, above those, there was layers of sands that graded from white into lighter browns to dark brown or even a bright red. There's an erosional disconformity at the top of that, and then you have this very black, what we call Van Valkenburg Formation, of laying on top of those sands we call Melbourne, and above it the Van Valkenburg. The Van Valkenburg consists of very black, organic, humate-rich material and some alternating layers of banded black and white sands. That is a fairly heavily reworked deposit. It's not clear that we're going to get meaningful ages of that deposit. It basically picks up sometime in the Pleistocene. We think it may be entirely Holocene, and then gets heavily reworked by these streams, all three of them meandering back and forth over time. But the objects within them still retain information that are, of course, important to us. The underlying Melbourne seems to be much more intact. Both are fluvially deposited. They're both water deposited or water lane sediments, but the material in the Melbourne may entirely be Pleistocene. But again, coating everything with petrochemicals means we have to go find some new stuff to date it directly ourselves. I think all the other points I'll sort of touch on as we go along. So within those layers, there's shells, there's sand, there's leaf and organic muck, sometimes roots growing down to different things. I only show these in passing and to make reference to the historical, finds of what the geologic setting looked like to them and the objects that were recovered within them. What we are finding is that, in fact, where I showed earlier, the basin margin was basically like coming across here. It turns out we are not in the basin. We are up on the dune. We have remnants of those layers that are probably not in place. They're actually part of the canal dump that was, as the canal was formed, they threw up those piles that were visible in the excavation by Sellards. We have a fundamentally different geologic setting. It's very similar, but it turns out what we're coming down on appears to be what Chamberlain in his initial criticisms of the site said is the Pleistocene and latest Holocene and very terminal Pleistocene intact areas that was the origin of all of the fauna and human remains. What we're finding too artifactually is tending to support that, even though things are disturbed so far, and we're coming, I'll have pictures in a moment of this, of where we're coming down on, but as our geologic setting improves, it turns out we've already found considerable differences or discrepancies in the human behavior that we can demonstrate has been engaged in on the site. One other point I wanted to make, as they grumped back and forth about how bad things were, unfortunately, they kept digging and digging and digging, and the canal walls migrated apart. They were 85 feet apart. Then they were 100 feet apart from the digging of the geologists and archaeologists and just interested folks around too were collecting things, which the critics used as a vehicle to attack the site's integrity. Basically, well, whatever you thought you knew, we can't see it anymore, so therefore it never existed. It's not a very good argument, but it works when you can't go back and show people what you'd been doing and such. So that's one of the reasons we go to such extreme trouble to document everything in place. And as I get to a couple shots of excavation and some mapping, you'll get a feel for that. Well, so basically the site by about 1920 was fought to a no decision. There was people that accepted the evidence and said, yeah, I think these are human beings contemporaneous in the Pleistocene with these animals that go extinct very quickly after that time. And the folks from DC led the charge of nuh-uh, and essentially that's where it sat. The man who first went and excavated at Clovis was Edgar Billings Howard. Earlier in the 30s, he turned it over to his graduate student, John Cotter, who ends up digging the site and finds in-place mammoth and mastodon bones with a number of artifacts. This is now in 36 when he says this, 10 years after discoveries in Folsom, New Mexico of an extinct form of bison with another kind of point that we call Folsom points now, was the first widespreadly accepted evidence. It wasn't the first good evidence found, it was just the first accepted evidence. And even that, some critics, the usual suspects, really didn't accept either. The reason I put this up is simply that the very call for reinvestigation of the site, the need to do lots of different kinds of analyses and the need to apply a wide range of analytical techniques. The call for that went out almost 80 years ago. And so it's been a while, but we're here and we're working on it. And boy, have we found some stuff out. But those things will come. Some of it, we're in the middle of the story. We're still writing the pages. One of the things we did prior to our excavation of the site was to core a lot of the longer transects. There was a coring project in 2008 and 9 to sort of basically just probing with the same machine, a geoprobe, pounding these, each of these segments is 4 feet long, and you go back down into the same hole with the next one. There's some compaction, and it makes it a little difficult to tell precisely where you are, but the relative order of the strata is well preserved, and you get a feel for, is there something intact here? Should we look in this area? Is it hold potential for yielding information if we go ahead and excavate? And it turns out one of 2 or 3 of the best of about 25 cores we took happened to be nearly dead center in our weather port, where we wanted to go anyway for all the other number of reasons that I've mentioned previously. It turns out that we knew ahead of time that was going to be a good stratigraphic sequence, that was where the thickest layers and thickest sequence of intact strata already existed. I threw this in for the crew also just to point out that our field director, Annie Marginin, is always with her camera, and she does this at the site too. I think it's there may be genetic information there to be recovered. So today, as I mentioned, the unnatural landscape has, the streams have been straightened. Even the old Van Valkenburg Creek, which we now call Lateral E, still exists. If you actually exit the site and go north and east across US 1 towards the, I believe it's the Baptist Retirement Home, if you're driving out towards that, you'll see a creek that's about this wide and about that deep. That's the Van Valkenburg Creek. There's actually little bits of it still preserved today. So a couple of important features to point out here is, first off, the canal has obviously gotten tremendously wider. We've lost a very big portion of the site, unfortunately, but it is what it is, so we work with what we have. The straightened out canals kind of create a false impression of, but it fits for what I'm trying to say about being on the upstream edge of a peninsula on a slightly higher ridge. Although with our weather port deeply entrenched in below the fill, it's a little hard to see that right now. All right, so from the air, it doesn't look like a whole lot, but this is that fill sequence here. It's almost 7 feet of it, and we've come down just on top of the very last bits of this mixed canal dump and other kinds of fill. Largely, it's actually outlined in string here. So what everyone's doing here, and this is actually taken this afternoon, about half of our crew is in their pits at the moment, and he took this shot, they've already removed the last bits of that overburdened fill, and we're in the top of black and white sands that we're not entirely sure if it's a combination of canal dump or if it's actually in place but disturbed. There's still little bits of glass every now and then, or trash in the sands that they're digging through right now. But in the back wall, you can see it a little bit better that there's a tremendous amount of bioturbation or plant disturbance in this site. Those are little rootlets that a lot of which we've already clipped off and are still in place from cabbage palms and a strangler fig that were removed before we started digging our big pit, or older stuff like long dead plants. And as we've been excavating it, you can really tell if it's been dead a while, it's not as well preserved. I don't think Greg would like it at all. But that said, we have fairly comparatively alkaline soils as opposed to the bulk of what you see in basically the eastern half of North America, that we have remarkable preservation of all the plant remains, the insects. Thus far in our disturbed spoil, and I should really mention this, I'll come to it in a moment here. As we run everything through the screens, we're using, by archaeological standards, we're fairly tedious and meticulous about things, and we really do try and collect everything that can be worthwhile as we go through our excavations. We also take bulk soil sediment, soil and sediment samples from every layer of every unit. So by the end of it, we'll have a cargo container full of 1.5 liter samples from everything that we've excavated. We do some spot checking with smaller screen meshes, but just the 16-inch alone has fundamentally altered our understanding of the use of this site, because we've recovered now approaching 400 or so very small flake stone artifacts, and they really are just flakes removed from the tips and sides of points and other stone tools that they're trying to refurbish and maintain and use as long as they can. They're trying to curate them and get as much life out of them as possible on a very lithic poor landscape. And I'll come into that again in a moment. But you can't quite see Mount Vero out the back here. You can just see a little bit of it. In about January 8th, it was still the second highest point in Indian River County. The ski season's pretty much closed, though. It's starting to erode pretty bad. So, but I wanted to just sort of make a little joke about and a thank you to the 300 plus volunteers that are involved in the Old Vero Ice Age Site Committee and the project itself, that are working with our crew and myself, and it really is an unbelievable melding of community and a growing body of intellectual, really worldwide intellectual interest and intellectual interaction. So there really is not another project like this anywhere in archaeology that any of us involved have ever heard of or know of. So to all the volunteers and everyone involved in the project, thank you. And I was also leading up to this with my question about if you've been to the site or not. If you have not, please come on out and see us. We're on the north side of the county administration buildings, right at the canal, as you've seen. And we work every day but Wednesdays. And so if you're interested in visiting, come on out. If you would like to volunteer and get dirty and help us run Mount Vero through a 16-inch screen, there's some paperwork, but we'll put you to work and get you dirty and show you lots of neat stuff right away. Well, so what have we found so far? And I'll briefly talk about a couple of the interesting stories, and I hope readily you see where we could segue into a much lengthier discussion about really any of these individual plants, animals, and other little critters. Of course, leading up to a number of them being fairly rare on this landscape. Certainly even in the Pleistocene landscape is what I mean by that. We have a lot of uncommon things. Of the 27 species ID'd by Mr. Berry in the teens, 6 are no longer in Florida or this part of Florida, and 1 is truly extinct, and it's really one of my favorites, and I love making jokes about this because we think we may have actually found halves of 2 of these. We're not positive, and we're keeping our fingers crossed, but they're a little dirty and wet, so we're trying to dry them slowly. And of course, Sisyphus sp doesn't sound particularly exciting, but the fact that you've all eaten them, or a form of them, is kind of fun for us. It's literally the bush that is used to make jujube fruit and, of course, gummy bears. And so I've joked that we have an extinct form of Pleistocene gummy bear here at our site. We could get a candy sponsorship for our... And so I joke about an extinct species that is no longer here at all. One of the other interesting stories in the mosaic of the plants and animals that existed together here at this location really does lack a fundamental, meaningful historic analog or even modern analog. It's not like we can say, well, you know, Vero in the Pleistocene was like southern Illinois right now, or it was kind of like, you know, Missouri and parts of Texas, which it is, and some of the plants disappear in those directions. And I just use one quick example here, the loblolly pine and the Caribbean pine, neither of which are as tasty as the jujubes. The loblolly pine recedes to the north and is locally extinct or extirpated, really by the end of the Pleistocene, it seems, as well as the Caribbean pine is locally extinct, but it's reduced its range to the south and even a little bit to the east, but to much warmer climes. So here we have plants that were living together, but one wanted to be cooler and one wanted to be warmer, and so they went in different directions. We lack directionality, and that's really what I was trying to say by, you know, we can't say we're like Texas or like southern Illinois or something like that. The exodus in every direction, coupled with the loss of genuine extinction of about 40 species of those animals and the one plant, mean that it doesn't add up. There is no way without learning the story and wonderfully now trying to incorporate the genetic history of these individual species of all these different taxa, means we can get at things that we can get at information that is not typically available, certainly not available in such abundance at any given site. And this is one of the animals that I'm quite pleased to say we have on site. It turns out Eremotherium, the giant of giant ground sloths, is only present at one archaeological site north of Brazil, and that's right here in Vero. If you Google Eremotherium, you will find this lovely picture dubbed Slothzilla. And it's a little bit hokey and kind of funny, but it does illustrate the one. It was the only one I could find of a Eremotherium standing up. This animal is the largest animal on the Pleistocene landscape. It is bigger than the mammoth and the mastodon and their other couple of cousins of elephants. Standing in such a position, trying to look less like Godzilla, they are about 18 feet tall and probably 22 feet tip to tail. And this is what they really look like. This is a couple skeletons. And also notice our friend, the Glyptodont, is trying to sneak off to the side there. But we have the mammoth and mastodon, but we also have these other kinds of things, like, as I'm sure you've gathered by now, that having one site in North America and Central America, we'd be real interested in this guy's genetics. He just doesn't exist on that terminal Pleistocene landscape with much abundance. So having any is a tremendous boon to the kinds of analysis we can go after. Vero is exceptionally blessed in that respect. We have a form of bison, the Eremotherium, the Sisyphus, the jujube. In total, I think we're up to 8 species that do not occur at any other archaeological site. In that 170 total, we're approaching 5% here that are not they're just not available at other sites. They just are simply not present. So the kinds of story, the story just on their presence and what they mean and to the human relation of the use of that site is interesting enough. But that's really the starting point. From there we take off into, specific animal life histories, the genetic composition of individuals, things like the glyptodont, where we may actually be able to do interesting things in terms of population dynamics, population genetics, not just because we have one sloth, but we also have enough of some of these animals where we can actually look at more complex structures that will appeal to people that know a lot more about chemistry and statistics than I do. One of the other funny things that we have is a comparatively rare dung beetle. And I always giggle about it because it's just, there's 18,000 kinds of extant dung beetles. And of course, Vero, with one of everything, we have to have a very interesting one, which we lucked out and did. There's a particularly interesting story about this as well, is that it's probably a living fossil. It really should not have succeeded into the Holocene. It probably should have gone extinct. One of the guys who wrote an article about the beetles assemblage at Vero in the 50s said basically he couldn't prove it at this point, but he suspects that this animal made its living on mammoth, mastodon, and horse dung, all of which are animals that are present there, and that it's not really clear to him at that time how this little insect survived into the after those animals went away. And so it's not extinct yet, but it's a pretty rare little beetle. So again, one of those strange little side stories, but as a very sensitive environmental indicator and very comparatively sensitive as opposed to mammoths that range all over. Again, more information to be gleaned. I mentioned that we found tiny, tiny little flakes, several hundred of them at this point. All of them would easily fit in the palm of my hand. They're primarily made out of coral that comes from Tampa. There's silicified agatized coral. Some of it's orange. We've seen a couple yellow pieces, and usually bright red. Really looks kind of like an agate, or it can just be regular white fossil coral. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I think the little radiating stars here are the actual coral polyps. Keep in mind that the person that flaked this stone tool in excess of 12,000 years ago was doing this on purpose. If you'd oriented the stone 90 degrees, if you just flipped it on its side, you wouldn't see the polyps, you just see streaks. They were doing this on purpose. And this one was found at the mouth of the Swanee, just where it goes out into the Gulf of Mexico today. This is the sum total of currently known Paleo-Indian coral artifacts from Florida. There's 2. I don't know that our little flakes are truly Paleo-Indian, but having to have walked 110 miles at least to acquire either the fossil or agatized coral, and probably on the order of about 125 miles to get any good Ocala chert, and we have some of that as well, which is just white and doesn't have the polyps in it. But if you have to walk that far, the Paleo-Indian folks and early folks in Florida were much more inclined to do that. The willingness to make the hike to Tampa decreases dramatically over time. So it's suggestive that they're early, but you understand suddenly why we have all these little tiny flakes, because if your point breaks, and you can see the coral polyps in this one as well, somebody's walking to Tampa, and we'll see in about 3 months. So there's an interesting little story here as well. This is a fragment of a point that we found in Mount Vero. And what you're looking at is essentially a band from just below the tip and just above the shoulder of the point. I don't know that it's one of these early lanceolate. It's probably not a Clovis point. It could be a Swanee or Simpson. It's not. There isn't enough to really say with any conviction that it's a 12,000-year-old point or a 4,000-year-old point. But we're still looking for the rest of it, and hopefully we'll find some more of that. And also, if we can mend any of the pieces that were found previously with it, that suddenly helps come up with more information. Well, so I'll end with a couple of sort of silly things I wanted to say here. Sometimes we stay late up and play with our toys until the wee hours, and one other thing I wanted to say was simply, again, please come on out. We won't keep you this late, and when you're done, we'll let you wash up. and really, the reason to come on out is you never know what you're going to see out at Vero on any given day. So thanks.
right, all right. Yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed that presentation. Again, we were just talking about human remains and associated fossils in Pleistocene, Florida. So again, this is the report. Again, this is it gets really more detailed than the report I was reading earlier, where they're finding the bones. So much proof of it being really old. The whole breakdown. I shared the link earlier. It's in the chat. In case you want to go ahead and read it. All right. So I appreciate you guys tuning in today. Again, we just got another early man uh in America. Again, forbidden. Oh, I gotta fix that. I just realized it says forbidding. 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 I gotta fix that. Forbidden histories. Forbidden archaeology. Yeah, they don't want people to know these things, how really old they really are. So they give it the minimum dates, but they can't deny it's Pleistocene. They can't deny they're finding art and mastodon and elephants, humans living with elephants in Florida, drawing and everything. Very old. Very, very old. Hold on, guys. So check out that series as well so you can get all the other examples of this. This is a really good series actually, this playlist right here, Forbidden Archaeology. I'm gonna go ahead and fix the spelling on that. I don't know when I did that. I just realized that. Right. We're gonna go out with because we tapped in, right? We tapped in. We tapped in on this Tuesday night. We tapped in. Going out with tapped in from Olmec 12. Tapped in, all right? Appreciate you guys tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We're gonna go ahead and end it here just so we don't make it too long, but we can read a lot on the Vero Man. What I do want to say, it seems like these people that were running this presentation, they're not in charge. They were in charge until like 2015, and then that's it. And then somebody else took on the Florida State University, I think. And then I don't know what happened after there. Right now, the site is closed permanently. They're not really following up on this site, guys. They're really trying to bury it. Okay, I don't think there's even an excavation going on today. Like how, I think that video was about 10, 12 years ago when they were asking for volunteers. They're not doing that anymore. They don't want you to worry about the Vero Man site. All right. They're gonna keep proving other things. So imagine they just found that all these bones and that little small section right there. Imagine what's under the whole earth. Like imagine what they can find if they really started excavating everywhere. Yeah. But I appreciate you guys either way tuning in. Just something else to think about. More proof America's a true old world. We had modern type humans here and old stratus. We're not talking about, missing links. We ain't talking about Neanderthals. We ain't talking about like, ape man, nothing like that. We're talking about modern type humans, in Florida, chilling with elephants, riding horses, camels and stuff, in a savannah, like Africa in a savannah, Florida. All these rivers and streams, as they're saying here, with the animals used to come gather and drink water. That's why it's so concentrated there. All right, and all these humans, a lot of, as I said in the presentation, he was showing several thousand years of use. This area, several thousand years of use. America, the true old world. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawaii.